So I'm finally getting around to making my best of 2019 list, and you're probably wondering why it's coming so late when most people do them in December. Main reason would be that I wanted to make every effort possible to see any movie that was on my radar that I heard was good or at least worth checking out. So, after watching literally hundreds of movies, I finally made a list of what I consider to be the best films of 2019. I should also mention that making lists like this are kind of weird and complicated. Movies will often have varying release dates based by country, so some movies may have premiered overseas in 2018 but premiered here in the US in 2019. There's also films I got a chance to see early, which technically aren't getting a wide distribution until 2020, but I'm still going to talk about them, because these videos are just an excuse to talk about great movies anyway. Up first we have some guilty pleasures or honorable mentions, whatever you want to call them. These are films that I don't necessarily feel belong on the list, but I still wanted to give them a shout out. So up first we have The Art of Self-Defense. This is a dark comedy that follows Jesse Eisenberg's character, who recently got assaulted, basically, and decides to take martial art classes. There he meets his sensei, who's kind of like a complete psychopath, who upends his life and tries to change him for the better. I enjoyed this film's personality and its blend of dark comedy and violence. It's got fun characters in it that feel different, but not so much Jesse Eisenberg's character. He plays the same nerdy, introverted recluse that he always does, which is getting a bit tired. But I really enjoyed the sensei, played by Alessandro Nivola, who does a good job playing a crazy asshole. I also enjoyed Eisenberg's friend in the Dojo Academy, whatever it's called, who is played by Imogen Poots, which is somehow not a fake name, or maybe it is, I guess I don't know. But another aspect that is kind of irrelevant, but I still appreciated, is Eisenberg is instructed to listen to more like angry, aggressive, extreme music. And most films, if they had a character like this, they'd have them listen to like, I don't know, Disturbed or like Metallica or some corny shit like that. But they actually made the effort to have the character listen to more obscure works from bands like Baton Rouge's Thou or Asterisk, which bands people don't listen to, except me and like 12 other people that watch this movie, but I appreciated that. Outside of the Jesse Eisenberg character being a problem, the other reasons why it's on honorable mentions only is because just the filmmaking is pretty unremarkable, the story's predictable, it's just like a simple little movie, but it's fun and different, and I think it's worth recommending. Next up on honorable mentions is The Souvenir, directed by Joanna Hogg. This film serves as a sort of semi-autobiographical piece for the director and kind of looks back on a part of her life and this sort of toxic relationship she developed with this older man. So the lead plays her, essentially, and is a writer and meets this older gentleman who, I guess, is a bad influence, which is definitely pretty played out as far as, movie plots are concerned, but I think it's very much carried by the two leads in the movie. The lead is actually played by Tilda Swinton's daughter, I guess her name's Honor Swinton Byrne or something, and the boyfriend's played by Tom Burke. Tilda Swinton's daughter is the definite standout. I thought she was great in the movie, but I also really liked Tom, who played the boyfriend, because he did a pretty good job playing a real, piece of shit. This movie served as a really interesting analysis on what it's like for us to look back on past relationships through the fog of our memories. It also deals with abuse, whether it's verbal or psychological, and also addiction, in a real and honest way. But there's definitely a lot of drawbacks, the main one being I really don't like the look of this film. Just the way it's shot, the lighting, the framing, etc. Really just unappealing to me. I also had major problems with the pacing, or maybe more specifically the structure. As I mentioned, this movie kind of has this feeling of like looking back through your memories, and so it's presented in these like sort of vignettes of her life, the lead character. It kind of reminded me of the structure of Frances Ha, but I think it's used to much greater effect in that film. In this movie, it makes it feel a little bit unfocused or meandering. I think most people love this one a lot more than I did, so if any of this sounds interesting to you, I definitely recommend checking it out. Next up is The Death of Dick Long. Incredible title, I know. This is another comedy from one of the directors of Swiss Army Man from a couple years ago, which was a movie I didn't really enjoy that much, but I appreciated how unique it was. This film I found to be a lot more enjoyable, and honestly could be the funniest movie of the year. It's almost absurdist in the way that it puts characters through crazy situations. Part of the problem with recommending this movie is I don't really want to spoil any aspect of what happens in the movie, but I can definitely say it's very funny and different. It's got really great, kind of straight-faced comedic performances in there. And funny enough, when compared with The Art of Self-Defense, it kind of has like the inverse relationship with music. It purposefully has the characters listening to just awful butt rock, shit like Stained and POD. But this was another movie where I didn't really love the way it was shot, which is kind of most comedies, unfortunately. Which is a real shame with this one, because I feel like it's filled with such funny characters and it's such a funny story that if the filmmaking was a little more stylized or had more personality to it, it would really enhance the whole film overall. There were also parts, I mean, as great as some of the comedic performances are in this movie, there were some moments where I felt like people were either breaking character or there were moments where they just weren't as strong. And as great as the use of the soundtrack was, there were moments where I felt like the score felt a little like cheap or like almost like temp music, which is pretty unfortunate. But this is still one of the funniest and most entertaining movies I saw last year, so if this sounds like you might like it, I'd say maybe try this one out. Up next would be Transit, directed by Christian Petzold. This is the same director as films such as Phoenix and Barbara, and I've really liked everything I've seen from him. The film centers around this main character who decides to take up the identity of this recently deceased writer as an attempt to kind of flee the country to escape this fascist regime that's going on. The big standouts for me in this movie would, for one, be the cinematography. I actually really loved the way this movie was shot. Really kind of bright, vibrant cinematography, but in a way that felt very casual and not in a way to call attention to itself. It felt very kind of subtle, almost naturalistic. The movie's also filled with lovely performances. I really liked the lead in this a lot, but honestly, I just really liked everyone. The movie also makes an interesting choice of not necessarily making the time period it's set in clear. Like, it seems like it's going for like a World War II, Nazis occupying France kind of thing, but there's not period accurate cars. It looks like it's set in current day. I actually don't even think they say the word Nazi in the whole movie. And these choices are an interesting idea, but I think that's all they really are, is just an idea. It's not really fleshed out to really say anything or do anything with that. The other aspect of the movie centers around the main character meeting this woman who's like looking for her missing husband or dead husband or something like that, and they end up falling in love, which I like a lot of aspects of that, and I like their chemistry and they're good actors, but it kind of still left something to be desired. This was also another movie that I had issues with the structure. At a certain point, it starts to get a little repetitive. There's these scenes where he's being like interrogated or interviewed, and they all kind of play out the same way, and it just feels like you're watching the same scene over and over again. But I still like this film. I like this filmmaker. I would probably recommend Phoenix the most out of any of these, but if Transit sounds good, I'd say it's worth your time. And last on the honorable mentions list is First Love, directed by Takashi Miike. Miike has directed literally over 100 films, though they're varying. So now we're on to the actual list, so starting with number 33. And yes, my list does have 33 entries. Reason being is I feel like only having a top 10 is very reductive when most years are excellent for film and have well over 10 films that are worth recommending. So my list is pretty long. If you only want to hear my top 10, feel free to fast forward to that, but I'm not sure why you wouldn't want to be recommended more movies. So anyway, at number 33, I have Paddleton. Paddleton could probably also be described as a dark comedy centered around these two guys and their friendship. They live in the same apartment building when one of them gets diagnosed with some kind of rare advanced stage of cancer. And Mark Duplass's character decides to, instead of going through chemo and making it a long-winded process before passing, he wants to go out, while he's still healthy and living life in a normal way. And he kind of enlists Ray Romano as his friend and neighbor to kind of help him through that journey. And it's great. And what sets this film apart from the other comedies and what actually puts it on this list is just not only the relationship between the two of them, both Ray Romano and Mark Duplass are really great and have awesome chemistry together, but I also really found myself emotionally invested in the characters and their story. I also really appreciated that the film didn't cower away from getting a little more serious and dark with, the subject matter at hand, and it needs to. But the film strikes an impressive balance between these two tones and making sure that the comedy's still very funny, but the emotional impact still really works. And I, for one, really enjoyed it, so if this sounds good, I would definitely recommend this one. At number 32, I have Hotel by the River, directed by Hong Sang-soo. A fairly prolific director in the South Korean scene, though he hasn't really broken through the same way Bong Joon-ho has or even Park Chan-wook, but definitely has his own notoriety. The film follows an aging poet and father who is convinced he's on the verge of death and decides to invite his two sons over to the hotel he's staying at to see them one last time. This is another film filled with great actors and performances, but particularly the father, who's played by Ki Ju Bong. I thought he was excellent in the film. I also really liked the dialogue in this. It felt very naturalistic and everyday, and I think it captures that very well. This movie will likely not be for everyone, as it doesn't really follow a real narrative structure. This film really just follows several conversations, whether it be between the father and his sons, the father and these two other women staying at the hotel, or the conversations amongst themselves, and that's basically the bulk of the movie. It's basically depressing coffee and cigarettes. So I wouldn't be surprised if people watch this and were kind of like, wait, nothing happened in this movie. I also really like the black and white cinematography. I think it really worked for this material, but I kind of wish it wasn't shot on digital. I think it would have really looked a lot more striking if it was shot on actual film. And even though I think the film would have benefited from introducing more elements to the plot, I definitely found myself really appreciating and enjoying this sad, simple little story. So if this sounds appealing at all, I definitely recommend it. At number 31, I have Loose. This is a drama/thriller centered around a family, but mainly Kelvin Harrison Jr.'s character, who plays a high school student who is like the valedictorian. He's very academic, he's intelligent, he's sociable. He seems like the perfect student and the perfect son. Until one day he turns in an essay centered around the radical teachings and political ideologies of Frantz Fanon. The teacher, played by Octavia Spencer, then decides that there must be something else kind of going on or simmering under the surface, and decides to kind of do some work to figure out what exactly is going on. The film then becomes a sort of a social thriller, where you're not really sure whether to believe the student or the teacher, and the film very deliberately toys with those expectations, which I found to be very engaging and watchable. The film is also an interesting exploration of race relations and social stigmas and expectations, and the film explores it in a very intelligent and articulate way. I thought all four of the leads in this movie were great. I really love Naomi Watts and Tim Roth, so it was fun to see them as a couple again, as a sort of Funny Games reunion. I did feel the film had some minor presentation issues here and there, and there were some moments that felt a little like cheesy or maybe theatrical, but I guess this movie is based on a play, so maybe that's why, I don't know. But overall, I found this movie incredibly engaging, thought-provoking, and just well acted, so if this sounds good, I would definitely recommend it. At number 30, The Mustang. This is a film based on a real-life program that works with violent convicts and pairs them up with training wild horses to be sold at auction. The film follows Matthias Schoenhardt's character, who plays this violent convict, as you would guess, and he has an estranged relationship with his daughter, kind of introverted and has closed himself off socially. But once he begins to work with the wild horses in that program, he starts to kind of build an affinity with them and feel like he has a connection. I mainly watch this because of him, because he's a great actor and he's in a film I really like called Rust and Bone that you should definitely also check out. But he again was fantastic in this movie. Bruce Dern is also in this, and I thought he was great as well, playing this kind of old, grizzled horse trainer. The film is directed by Laure de Clermont-Tonnerre, who's a French film director I'm not familiar with, but she's clearly a director who understands how to work with her actors, and I'm really curious to check out her other work. This is a film that on paper I think I wouldn't really be interested in normally, as it seems a little bit simple or maybe just straightforward. You could even call it cliche, but the way the story is told and performed really elevates the material. So if any of this sounds appealing to you, I would definitely say seek this one out. At number 29, The Nightingale. This is from director Jennifer Kent, who did The Babadook from a couple years ago. This is another film that I don't really want to give away too much about again, but it's set in 1825, and it follows this girl Claire, who is like this Irish convict and servant for the British Army, and she decides she needs to get revenge on this British officer, but she is in like Tasmania and doesn't really know her way around the land, so she enlists the help of an Aboriginal tracker to help her find her way. And their relationship and the development of it is easily the best part of the movie. Both actors are great and have awesome chemistry together, but what I really enjoyed is how I felt like their characters' growth was really earned throughout the film. This was another movie that I wish was shot on actual film, but I do think the DP did a good job on working with digital. It makes good use of the Academy ratio, which is 1:37:1, which is a bit taller. It lets you feel those tall, old trees, and makes the settings feel a little bit more evocative. I also appreciated how kind of bleak and almost harrowing this movie was. It's pretty violent, and the violence is rooted in realism, which may not work for everyone, but I think it's important for this story that it's portrayed that way. So if you think you can handle it, I would definitely say check this one out. At number 28, I have Shadow. This is from director Zhang Yimou, who directed films like Hero and House of Flying Daggers. This is a historical epic set during the Three Kingdoms era of China. It's a little difficult to summarize concisely, as there's a lot going on in the movie, but it mainly follows this guy who is a shadow, or essentially a body double or decoy for this important figure. and he's being forced to secretly train for this battle in the hopes that he can defeat the challenger and reclaim this stolen land. If you've seen any of this director's other movies, then you probably already know how masterful he is with visuals, but typically he uses very lush color palettes, but this movie has a very gray, very flat-looking color palette, but the way he manages to make that visually striking is really impressive. As you would also expect, it's a great martial arts movie. It's got really creative action set pieces, and also really inventive uses of different weapons I've never seen. I will say the movie does have some pacing issues. The first 30 minutes or so takes some time for the movie to really hit its rhythm and for it to settle in with the audience. The film might be a little overly ambitious too. It's kind of got like too much going on, I think. But even if some aspects of the movie aren't as great as others, it's still one of the most unique looking and well shot movies I've seen all year. It's got great acting, great music, and I couldn't help but get swept up in this historical epic. So if this sounds good to you at all, I'd say check it out. At number 27 is Long Day's Journey into Night. This is a Chinese film from director Bi Gan, and it follows this guy who returns to his hometown after being away for, I don't know if they disclosed, just for a long time, and he starts to search for this woman that he spent a summer with that he just has never been able to get out of his head. Now, this is a film that I would agree is definitely slow-paced, and this is also probably the least accessible movie on my list. But on one hand, it's kind of like this mystery thriller, kind of almost noir piece, but it's also this kind of like romantic epic. I found a sort of narrative through line similar to In the Mood for Love, but a kind of visual aesthetic that reminded me of Enter the Void. The first 70 minutes of the movie are the sections that have that feeling of the mystery and noir, after which is when the title card comes up, which is pretty funny. It's like halfway through the movie, which is also very Gaspar Noé. After the title cards, the film shifts into a kind of a different experience where it becomes a lot more dreamlike, almost surrealist. Also, after the title card, the film shifts into 3D, and the rest of the film is all in one take. Think of something like a 59-minute take, all in one shot. And even before this, I already love the cinematography in this movie. I think it's shot incredibly well, but the 59-minute 3D oneer really sets it apart and just puts it on another level. It did have some issues. I mean, I think that first 70 minutes is a little meandering. I think it could have been cut down almost by half. And other little things like some voiceover narration I didn't care for. This is probably the most divisive film on my list, but if any of this sounds interesting, I'd say definitely try checking it out. At 26 is Wild Rose. I would call this movie A Star is Born, but good. The movie's big standout is definitely Jessie Buckley's performance. She plays this girl who recently just gets released from prison, and her dream was to always be like a country singer. But things aren't really easy for her. She no longer can work at her old job singing at this local bar, and her mother was raising her two kids while she was in prison, and so now she has to kind of get reacclimated with them and their relationship, and her just getting reintroduced to society again as well. Not only is Jessie Buckley's performance great, but she also does her own singing in the movie, and I think she has an amazing voice. And keep in mind, I mean, I don't really like country music at all, and I was still able to appreciate her singing and the movie as a whole, but I could see people who have like an abject hatred for country music not really enjoying this, so keep that in mind. Another aspect I really appreciated was making Jessie's character a little bit more complicated and not just like really easy to like. But Jessie has this charm to her as well and just really brings her own exuberance to the role that it makes her performance a lot more nuanced and interesting to watch. Though the movie is definitely guilty of having some cliches, and I would say some of the conflicts between characters felt a little contrived, but I still thoroughly enjoyed this movie. Hopefully you will too, so check this one out. At number 25 is Honey Boy. I'm just now realizing how many films on this list this actually applies to, but this is another semi-autobiographical film sort of based on the life of Shia LaBeouf. As you would guess, it follows the life of a child actor and his abusive father, and Shia LaBeouf is essentially playing his own dad, and it kind of serves as like the world's most interesting therapy experiment being filmed. The film feels unbelievably personal and honest. I also really love the use of anamorphic lenses. I actually want to shout out the DP on this. Her name's Natasha Breyer. She also shot The Neon Demon, which is also one of my favorite looking movies of the past few years, but she did a great job with this as well. I would say the movie is a little like thin on plot, but big on character. But I still think the film captures a lot about father-son relationships and just disappointments, life not going the way you expected. I thought Shia LaBeouf was great in this movie, and I usually don't really like him. I also really liked Noah Jupe, who plays the kid, Shia LaBeouf, if you will. And FKA Twigs is in it for some reason, so that's fun. But yeah, this is seriously one of the most emotional and just moving movies I saw all year, and this movie really worked for me. At number 24, I have the documentary 63 Up. This is the ninth entry in the series, with the first one being 7 Up from all the way back in 1964. The original idea being that they found all these different 7-year-old children from various backgrounds in the UK. And every 7 years, this director revisits all of his subjects and just sees how their lives have changed over that time. This project manages to capture so much about human emotion and just real life through different people. One aspect the films explore is how much our personalities are imbued in us at a young age and how much of us is still developing and in flux and changing every day. And watching these people kind of reminisce on their life and talk about their struggles is just so unbelievably special. I also wouldn't worry too much that it's the ninth film or whatever, because I feel like all of them really have their own contained experience, and they also pull footage from other entries to give context to what they're talking about. This is one of the most human, empathetic, and important documentaries of all time, and I highly recommend it. At number 23 is One Cut of the Dead. Normally I play the trailer here while I talk over it, but I feel like the trailer kind of spoils everything, so just stare at the lo-fi beats girl for a minute. I can't even really talk about it very much either. Reason being is I feel like the film does such a great job of kind of pulling the rug out from under you, and I think a big part of the experience is not really knowing much about it going in. The setup is that there's a group of people working on making a zombie movie, and they're in this warehouse, and there's like this long 45-minute one-shot that's actually a one-shot, like there's no hidden cuts. And that's all I really want to say. Just know that this movie is funny, clever, and original. I would say the movie suffers from some presentation issues. I don't think it looks that great, but I think some of that is very much deliberate. And I think part of that first 45 minutes or so kind of drags. It's like you kind of have to get past that to get to the good parts, essentially. But weirdly enough, this is one of the most feel-good experiences I had all year, and really just celebrates the joy of filmmaking. Some people are saying this is the best horror comedy since Shaun of the Dead, so if that sounds like your jam, check this one out. At number 22, I have High Life. This is from renowned French director Claire Denis, which admittedly, and much to my own shame, I haven't watched any of her films besides this one as of yet. But this film's premise centers around a group of prisoners that have been sent out into space, basically as guinea pigs. And their mission is to harness the energy of a black hole. And while that's going on, there's also a doctor on board who's doing these bizarre reproductive experiments involving artificial insemination. And this film is an interesting mix of that sort of introspective space movie a la Solaris, but also like an erotic thriller. Robert Pattinson gives a great kind of understated performance. I really have grown to appreciate him as an actor and the fact that he actively chooses to work with such an eclectic mix of talented directors. Juliette Binoche plays the doctor in this, and she's one of my favorite actors, and she gives such a brave and just committed performance in this. Really loved the lighting in this, a lot of creative soft lights used in a way that didn't feel distasteful or forced in. I did have some problems with the script though, one being the structure. I feel like if the story was told in a different way, it could have been more effective, and there's some other things that happen in the script that feel either convenient or unclear. For the most part, the film looks great, but there were definitely some visual effects sequences that weren't so strong. And I gotta say, this is one of the horniest movies I've ever seen, so that's probably worth mentioning. This is one of the most divisive movies on my list, but I thought it was great, so if you think you might like it, I'd say try it out. At number 21 is Ash is Purest White. This is from Chinese director Jia Zhang, who brought us films such as Still Life, A Touch of Sin, and Mountains May Depart, among many others. This is another film that's a little difficult to summarize concisely, but the setup is essentially that we follow this young girl named Kiao, and she falls in love with this mobster named Bin, and at some point in the film, he starts to get attacked, and she decides to draw a gun to scare them off, but it's illegal to own a gun in China, and so she goes to prison for 5 years. Once she's released, she decides she needs to find Bin again and be reunited with him, but she soon realizes what a revolution China is going through, both socially and politically. The film has a lot of different styles and elements that I think manage to blend together to something very unique, mixing together social commentary and the criminal underworld in China, but also this classic feeling of a Hollywood melodrama. This film also kind of spans 17 years. This is sort of like China's Boyhood. The early parts of the movie are shot on a mini DV all the way back in 2001. And then there's a middle section where they're at a musical performance, and that was shot in 2005 during the making of another one of this director's films. The different formats don't always blend together super well, but I do feel that they're thematically appropriate. I should also mention that I felt like the real emotional climax payoff for this film happens kind of in the second act. I felt like the third act drags a little bit, but overall this is still a great movie. So if this sounds like something you might be interested in, I'd say try this one out. At number 20 is The Last Black Man in San Francisco, the directorial debut of Joe Talbot, and yep, you guessed it, it's a semi-autobiographical story of his friend Jimmy Fails. The film follows Jimmy and his friend Mont, and basically Jimmy's grandfather had built a house in San Francisco many years ago, but Jimmy and his family don't live in that house anymore, another family does, and what results is these characters kind of going on a quest to essentially reclaim the house again. The film's got this really bright, vibrant cinematography that I just loved. The film also kind of has a dreamlike quality to it, while also kind of feeling like a sort of fairy tale or a fable, which is really interesting as a presentation choice because, on the other hand, it really has a lot going on as far as in its messages. It explores family and legacy, race relations and masculinity, and it even serves as an indictment of gentrification and capitalism. You could say that this film is a little tonally all over the place, and you maybe wouldn't be wrong, but I think it really does work, and it's also got one of my favorite endings in a movie all year. So if this seems like something you'd like, I'd say try this one out. At number 19, I have Monos. This is a Colombian film, and it follows the story of 8 child soldiers and this woman who seems to be like their political prisoner. And the film slowly reveals just how strange these child soldiers are as they start to do like weirdo cult-like rituals. All the while this prisoner is trying to find the right time to try to escape. Where other films seem more dreamlike, Monos feels a little like hallucinogenic, which gives the film a sort of bizarre, almost off-kilter kind of feeling. The film also reminds me of a sort of cross between Lord of the Flies and like Apocalypse Now, but with a more erratic and sort of free-flowing nature to it. Every actor's performance in this feels so authentic and just genuine. The cinematography is amazing, but I gotta say the real standout is Mika Levy's score. Just a beautiful composition. It blends this really soft ambience with these really sharp, strong reverberations, and also mixes in these like kind of strange beeping noises, and it all blends together to make a really unique sensory experience. And the budget for this film was only like $2 million, so for it to look and sound this incredible is really an accomplishment. The film does suffer from some pacing problems and some editing choices, but overall, this is one of the most visceral and engrossing experiences I had in a movie last year, so if this seems good, try this one out. At number 18, I have For Sama. It would be difficult to call this documentary anything other than emotionally devastating. The film was captured by the Syrian woman, and she covers 5 years of this war and this uprising in her city of Aleppo. And the film is a very intimate look at her life during these times as she finds love, gets married, has a child, all the while the war continues to tear through the city, causing more and more death and destruction. And the footage she was able to capture is just insane and disturbing, but also really important to show. This movie made me feel ignorant and a great shame for not being aware that this was happening, and I think it's really important that more people are made aware of it. The movie did have some editing problems, and the real-world violence depicted in this might be hard for some to watch, but if you think you can handle it, I think it's a must-see. This was nominated at this year's Oscars for Best Documentary, and I think it should have won, so please watch this one if you can. At number 17, I have Knives Out. This is your classic, like, murder mystery whodunit, but with the unique approach you would expect from Rian Johnson. The setup being that there's this family who has this wealthy estate because their grandfather is, like, this renowned murder mystery author. One night, he's actually murdered himself, and thus begins the mystery of who was the killer. Daniel Craig plays a detective, and he was really entertaining to watch, though he does have this crazy kind of Kentucky foghorn leghorn accent that hit me like a punch in the face. It also kind of reminded me of his character in Logan Lucky, which was weird, but after 15 minutes or so I got used to him. And Ana de Armas plays the nurse for the old man, or I guess I should say murder victim, and she was also really great. I really enjoyed the rest of the supporting cast as well, though I will say some characters are a little bit more fleshed out and well written than others. The film is well shot and has really great framing and particularly great blocking. One of my favorite moments was Daniel Craig's character was like breaking down his thought process while simultaneously removing his jacket and like uncuffing his sleeves and rolling them up, which obviously doesn't sound exciting, but choices like that really enhance their scenes and I appreciate the extra effort. The script is very clever and sharply written, but there are some little conveniences and contradictions here and there. But overall, the film is fun, well written, and has tons of great setups and payoffs, so if this sounds like your jam, try this one out. At 16, I have Little Women, directed by Greta Gerwig. Based on the famous book of the same name, it follows 4 sisters in the years after the Civil War. Weirdly enough, I think my favorite thing about this movie is how much you can see Greta Gerwig has grown and improved as a director. You can sense that the film is a lot more assured and she's starting to develop her own style. This is another film that makes great use of intricate blocking and staging, really makes the scenes a lot more engaging. For the most part, the performances are pretty great, though I will say some are definitely stronger than others. Saoirse Ronan and Florence Pugh are the definite standouts here. Some people felt miscast, like I feel like Chris Cooper was kind of weird. Outside of some cliches and some bits of dialogue I didn't like, for the most part I think the script is really great. I particularly like the fact that they chose to tell the story in a non-linear fashion. It gives the storytelling a lot more emotional context, which I found to be very rewarding. So even if you're a dumbass and think this movie's for girls only, I recommend you check this one out. At number 15 is Waves. This is from director Trey Edward Schultz, who brought us films like Krisha and It Comes at Night. And the film follows a family, but mainly this brother and sister, as they navigate through life and love and forgiveness and loss. This is one hell of an actor's showcase in this movie. Kelvin Harrison Jr., who was also in Loose, is great in this as well. Taylor Russell, who plays his sister, was also fantastic. Sterling K. Brown as the dad was also great. I particularly liked the aspect of his character that explored the father-son relationship, pushing him to do better and be better, out of love for him and for his own good, and how that can still be misguided. The film is incredibly well shot with this very free-flowing style of cinematography that reminded me of a Terrence Malick film. Particularly great job with the color correction on this one, and also makes really great use of changing aspect ratios. This was also the case in It Comes at Night, but I think the use of it was a lot more motivated in this film. Your mileage may vary when it comes to the soundtrack. I personally didn't like a lot of the licensed music they use, but that's because I'm annoying and don't like anything. Even outside of that, I would also say that the film's a little soundtrack heavy, which leads me to feeling like I'm watching a collection of music videos as opposed to an actual film. I would also say that one of the characters' stories kinda ends abruptly, which is sort of the point, but it also led to me feeling a little starved for context as far as how these changes affected this character. This film also has a sort of atypical structure that I personally enjoyed, but I could also see it not working for everyone. I saw a lot of kids like trying to dunk on this movie on Twitter, which was weird. All I can say is that I personally found it really engaging, well shot, and well acted, and honestly just ambitious as a drama. So if it sounds like this one might be up your alley, I definitely recommend it. At number 14, Asako 1 and 2. This is from Japanese director Ryusuke Hamaguchi, and he'd probably be best known for his film Happy Hour from a couple years ago, which I actually still haven't seen as of yet, but I heard a lot about considering its 5-hour runtime. And this film, I guess you could call it a sort of Japanese pop romance, which would normally sound like total dog shit to me. But I found myself really enjoying this film. The premise being that this girl Asako meets this boy Baku and falls in love with him. Until one day, Baku disappears out of her life without a trace. 2 years go by, and one day she sees this boy that resembles Baku almost identically, but it's not him. They start dating and eventually build a happy life together, until one day, traces of Asako's past begin to resurface. This is another film that I felt had a very unique and fun personality that I found to be very watchable. The main driving force of this film is definitely its 6 main characters. They're all great and have a very palpable chemistry amongst themselves. Each performance feels genuine and believable, and they all manage to have a distinct personality without falling into tropes. I also appreciated that they weren't going out of their way to make their characters as likable as possible. It's not amazingly shot or anything, but I do like the look of this film. Overall, this odd and modern romance expresses a wide array of emotions in a quiet and beautiful way, so if you think you might like it, I'd say try this one out. At number 13, The Invisible Life of Eurydice Guzmão, though I think they changed the name now to just Invisible Life. I don't know. It's a Brazilian film, and without spoiling much, it's about 2 sisters that get separated for a long period of time. All the acting was fantastic, especially the 2 leads playing the sisters. The film is well shot with some unique presentation choices. Certain shots will intelligently choose to hold longer than you'd expect, giving the actors a lot more time to display a wider range of emotions. I was also really impressed by the way this film makes you care about the characters. I also really enjoyed the varied mix of tones that this film has. It's very emotional, but also has humor sprinkled throughout. It has moments that are very disturbing and others that are intentionally kind of awkward, which in the hands of a lesser filmmaker I think could have been a real mess, but here it comes together for a very unique and enjoyable experience. So if this sounds appealing to you at all, I'd say check it out. At number 12, The Climb. A dark comedy about 2 friends. It spans several years as it explores their laughter, their heartbreaks, and their rage with each other. There's a lot going for this film, but I would say the main standout would be the visual presentation. The majority of this movie is comprised of these thoughtfully coordinated long takes that felt very purposeful. The two leads were great, which is even more impressive when you realize that they're played by the director and writer of the film, and they're actually best friends in real life, which leads to this undeniable chemistry that just could never be replicated. Though it's a very different movie with very different goals, I was reminded of the film Blindspotting, and what those two's real-life friendship brought to that film. Both the story and the writing were great, with particularly good banter between the two leads. There's a collection of kind of bizarre and uncomfortable situations that are often hilarious. The story also unfolds in very unexpected ways, which felt refreshing. Overall, I was very surprised and impressed by this film, and I'm excited for the future of this writer-director duo. So if this sounds like it might be up your alley, I'd say definitely check this one out. At number 11, An Elephant Sitting Still. This is the feature film directorial debut of Chinese filmmaker Hu Bo. The film takes place over the course of a single day and follows four main characters, and all four of them seem to be going through a hell of a day, and slowly their stories begin to intertwine. There's actually a very tragic backstory to this film, unfortunately. Sadly, soon after completing the production on this film, Hu Bo took his own life. And not to say that our value as humans is our work, as that would be very reductive and simplistic, but it was clear that he had a real gift as a storyteller and as a writer. And these four character stories fold into each other in a very profound way that you can tell was well thought out. The film is mostly presented in very lengthy and impressive one-shots. It has a unique look to it as well. It feels very cold and colorless, which may not always have looked the best, but I felt was thematically appropriate. The film also captures a deep sadness, almost hopelessness, which is only amplified by director Hu's tragic passing. His death casts a huge shadow over this film and probably always will. The two will always be inextricable. This may not be for everyone, as it is a 4-hour-long film and not everyone has the patience for that. And a part of me does feel like you could have cut the film down and still gotten the same impact, but it also feels like that might rob the film of its soul. This film may not be for everyone, but I found it to be incredibly special, so if it sounds good to you, please watch it in honor of Hu Bo. At number 10, Beanpole, directed by Kantemir Balagov. This is a Russian film set in the years just after World War II has ended in war-torn Leningrad, now known as St. Petersburg. The film follows two women who are assisting in a medical facility filled with soldiers injured from the war. This film is incredibly well directed. For one, there's great performances throughout. Both leads are fantastic, but I particularly loved Vasilia Perelegina. She was incredible. And even crazier, when I looked her up, I didn't see any other credits under her name, so if this is her first performance, that's insane, because I thought she gave one of the best performances of the year. The framing and shot composition is clearly well thought out. It's also got an interesting mix of different color temperatures, and tons of very well coordinated long takes. All of this, along with really great production design, makes for a very unique and almost painterly look to this film, that maybe not everyone will like, but I personally really appreciated. This film is an emotionally harrowing look at trauma, not only in its depiction of how the war has greatly affected people in different ways, but also in exploring these bizarre relationship dynamics that continually evolve in strange and often sickening ways. This is definitely an emotionally challenging film, so it might not be for everyone, but if you think you might like this one, I highly, highly recommend it. At number 9, Pain and Glory. This is from renowned Spanish director Pedro Almodovar, and wouldn't you know it, it's a semi-autobiographical film that follows the life of an aging director as he reminisces on his life, both past and present. The film is very internal and meditative, as an act of looking back on life through the prism of his memories, of his childhood, of his mother, of his work, and even his relationships. And I think all that gave Antonio Banderas a lot to work with. And it shows because he was incredible in the film. This is probably his best performance, and it earned him the Best Actor award at this year's Cannes International Film Festival. I also need to talk about my other favorite performance in this movie, which surprisingly is not Penelope Cruz, although she's great. It's this actor Leonardo Sbaraglia. I thought he was excellent, and the scenes shared between him and Banderas are easily the height of the film. The vulnerability that they share with their performances is something that just feels unbelievably special. I really loved the cinematography in this as well, just lush and vibrant looking. Really great use of subtle dolly shots, both pushing in and pushing out. Also great use of color and texture, which is something Almodovar is kind of known for. There are some slight pacing issues in the middle, and I guess the structure is a little wonky. My first time watching this, I really liked this film and admired it a lot, but on my second watch I grew to really love it. This is probably now my second favorite film of his, next to The Skin I Live In, which is definite high praise, trust me. So if this sounds good to you, I definitely recommend you check it out. At number 8, The Irishman. Scorsese's 3.5-hour crime epic almost felt like his magnum opus. I've mentioned it before, but as a sort of response to those saying that this film really follows the same beats as Goodfellas or Casino, but this film is a unique approach to a similar story, and I felt that its somber and introspective tone really brought a tremendous amount of value. The cinematography was great, as you would expect, filled with plenty of long takes and tracking shots and impressive crane work as well. De Niro, Pacino, and Pesci are all excellent, and probably the best they've been in over 10 years. A lot of attention to detail in their performances that I really appreciated, like De Niro's stutter slowly getting worse with age, like in that phone call scene. God, incredible. Or Pesci's changes in physicality. As he gets older, he gets shakier. Outside of the big three, the rest of the cast is great as well, and honestly just like an embarrassment of riches. You've got Harvey Keitel, Stephen Graham, Bobby Cannavale, Anna Paquin, Jesse Plemons even shows up. Also really impressed with the production and costume design, and the way it subtly reflects the passage of time. This movie travels through decades, and it would have been really easy for it to feel like costumey or overdone, but the way it was handled felt very tasteful and appropriate. I didn't love all of the effects as far as like the de-aging, and some of the blood spatters could have been a little better. Some editing problems here and there, and I don't know how much I cared for the framing device of this film, but overall, it's successfully dramatic, funny, meditative, and engaging. I thought it was excellent, and if you think you might too, I'd say check it out. At number 7, I have Marriage Story. Basically, a love story told through the lens of divorce. It very thoroughly explores relationships and parenthood and expectations in a way that feels very genuine and emotionally truthful. Both Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson are incredible in this film. It's also got a supporting cast full of seasoned career actors like Laura Dern, Wallace Shawn, Ray Liotta, Alan Alda, and even with their limited screen time, they managed to bring a lot to the movie. It's also got really great pacing. For a film that's over 2 hours and 15 minutes long, it never drags, and every scene feels purposeful and deliberate. On the surface, this could probably sound like a done-to-death relationship drama you've seen 100 times before, but the intricacies and nuances they explore feel so thorough and well thought out that it kind of sets this film apart. Although I didn't love the cinematography, if anything that's more of a testament to just how strong the writing and acting is in this film. So if this sounds good to you, I'd say try this one out. At number 6, I have Uncut Gems, directed by the Safdie brothers. This is one exhilarating, intense film to watch. It follows Howard, played by Adam Sandler, who's a jewelry store owner, but more importantly, a total gambling addict. And the film is kind of essentially a high-wire act of sorts. He has to balance this high-stakes bet he made with his relationship and his business and his adversaries, and he has to keep it all from crashing down on him, which all comes together to make this high-energy, anxiety-inducing experience, which more than anything makes it incredibly engaging. This movie is seriously a blast to watch, and Adam Sandler delivers a legitimately great performance, which now creates a holy trinity of great dramatic performances from Adam Sandler. Unless I'm forgetting one? Am I forgetting one? Oh yeah, Spanglish. The Safdies also have a very unique presentation to their films, typically using these huge telephoto lenses to get really cramped feeling close-ups on their characters to help build that tension and that anxiety. And on this film they paired with a notorious cinematographer, Darius Khondji, who has worked with like tons of my favorite directors, and he did a great job as usual. I really enjoyed the rest of the supporting cast, but I was particularly impressed by Kevin Garnett, who I don't believe has had any like formal training in acting, and even though he's playing himself, I thought he was great. One of my favorite aspects of the Safdie brothers' writing is how they manage to get these characters that are kind of awful people and make terrible decisions and still make them relatable and sometimes even likable. I also really loved the score. This is the second time the Safdie brothers have worked with Oneohtrix Point Never. I really love his work, and I feel like it adds so much to the atmosphere of this film. I'm really happy to see the Safdies getting more and more notoriety. They're very talented directors, and I'm really excited to see their future. So if this sounds interesting to you, I'd say definitely try this one out. At number 5, Climax, directed by Gaspar Noé. The same director as films such as Irreversible and Enter the Void. My first time seeing the latter was one of the most memorable experiences I've ever had in a movie. And Climax is kind of similar. It follows a group of dancers led by Sofia Boutella, and they're training for like this tour that they're going to be going into the US with. And it's their last night of rehearsals, so they're celebrating, having this big party, and while all that's going on, someone decides to spike the punch with acid. And what results is one big nightmarish, anxiety-inducing experience. But what's really impressive is it doesn't rely on showing you what these characters are hallucinating, but instead shows their performances and their reactions to those hallucinations. That, paired with these motivated, high-energy, almost chaotic kind of camera styles, really help you get in the headspace of the characters. There's some really impressive filmmaking on display here, with these intricate and hyper-coordinated sequences that are often upwards of like 10 to 15 minutes. I also have to talk about the dance numbers in this movie, which are great. They have such inventive choreography and inject so much personality. It's just such a blast to watch, honestly. Outside of Sofia Boutella, who's excellent, and one other actor, I don't think the rest of the cast is like really trained actors. They're mainly dancers. And I think that could have been a disaster, but Noé managed to have a unique approach to that, as usual. He worked with these non-actors for months in developing their backstories, and would film their conversations and just let them kind of riff off of each other and talk about whatever, and it came kind of naturally, which I think some might find a little clunky or awkward, but I found it to be very interesting. Overall, this film was a unique sensory experience and pretty fucked up, so if it sounds like you might like it, I'd say check this one out. At number 4 is Portrait of a Lady on Fire. This is from French writer-director Céline Sciamma, whose films I've been meaning to get into for quite a while, but haven't had the chance. After seeing how excellent this film was, I'm that much more eager to finally go check them out. Portrait is set in 18th century France and follows two women. One is a painter, and the other is to be married to a man she doesn't know. But before that, the husband has requested a portrait of her to be sent to him, to ensure that he does in fact actually want to marry her. And as you would guess, she definitely does not want to marry him. So anytime an artist comes to paint her portrait and send to him, she makes their life a living hell and makes it basically impossible for them to do so. So they bring in this new painter to pretend to be her friend and companion, but what she's really doing is closely studying all her features to paint her in secret at night, which I think is such a beautiful framing device for a love story. Both leads deliver mesmerizing performances, and their chemistry is just undeniable. The writing is also excellent. For one, the dialogue. It's filled with memorable lines and intriguing conversations. My personal favorite is when they're discussing the myth of Orpheus, and how they use that story to kind of reframe the narrative. There's also really intelligent choices in the storytelling. It takes its time, establishing your understanding of both leads on their own, slowly building their trust and eventually their feelings, or later the way they steal glances at each other and eventually have to hide their affections. It makes everything feel earned and believable. I felt there was a poignant contrast between what their lives would be like in the real world versus what their lives are like on this kind of idyllic world that they share on the island. Not to mention, this is one of the most gorgeously shot films of last year. Big shout out to Claire Mathon for her work on this one. I think she really knocked it out of the park. I was also really impressed by the lack of score. Most films use it to kind of be emotionally manipulative, but Portrait doesn't need to use that crutch. It doesn't need to use music to tell you how to feel. The strength of the performances and the thoughtful cinematography do that all on their own. It also has my favorite ending that I've seen in years. Hauntingly beautiful. This is easily one of the best films of the year, so if this sounds good to you, definitely check it out. At number 3, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, directed by Quinoa Tortellini. Possibly the most divisive film on my list, but no amount of awful Twitter discourse could take away my love for this movie. It follows Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth, an aging actor and his stunt double, as they try to reconcile with their glory days being behind them and the changes coming to Hollywood. But it's not so much about that. The plot is kind of a loose framework for us to get to know our characters. I remember in an interview, Tarantino was talking about his favorite movies that have come out since he became a director, and he talked about his favorite hangout movies.
Number 6 would be Rick Linklater's Dazed and Confused. I think maybe the greatest, maybe along with Rio Bravo, the greatest hangout movie ever made.
I'm not sure if it was his direct intention on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but this is a great hangout movie. I think that's greatly owed to the amazing character work going on, along with the great writing you would expect. The characters are likable and funny, and they have a real charm to them. Both Leo and Brad and their interactions are a real blast to watch. I'm pretty sure I've gone on the record on saying I'm not as in love with Leo as an actor as everyone else seems to be, but I do think he's excellent in this, and this is probably my favorite role of his. Quentin will do this thing in his career where he'll pick out actors that he used to watch as a kid or when he was younger, and give them another role to kind of put them back in the forefront. You know, like David Carradine or Pam Grier or even Robert Forster. And considering this movie is about its lead kind of going through that exact same issue, you know, where they're no longer the leading man, I think casting an actor whose career kind of resembles that more would have given the film and the performance another layer to appreciate. Still, I think Leo was incredible, and so I shouldn't complain too much. On the other hand, Brad Pitt has always been one of my favorite actors, and he's fantastic in this, and gets to flex his acting skills in a very different way. Insanely happy for him to have won his Oscar finally. There was a lot of criticism around Margot Robbie's portrayal of Sharon Tate, mostly around her screen time and number of lines, which I think is a very reductive and almost dismissive way of evaluating a performance. I wonder if they would say the same about Alan Arkin in Little Miss Sunshine, Jason Robards in All the President's Men, or even Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal fucking Lecter. Either way, I thought she brought a lot of heart to the movie, and the scene of her watching herself at the movies is one of the sweetest and most heartfelt things I've seen in a movie in a long time. The soundtrack is great, as usual, and does a great job of reflecting the era it's set in, the real genius being including different advertisements from that era playing over the radio as well. The production design is incredible and really adds to the authenticity of the movie. Overall, there's just a really meticulous attention to detail. It reeks of tremendous effort. This is a strong showcase of great acting and great writing, and I really enjoyed how patient and mature it was at some moments, but also how fun and snappy it was in others. So if that sounds good to you, I'd say check it out. At number 2, The Lighthouse, directed by Robert Eggers. It follows two lighthouse keepers, played by Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson, as they try to keep their sanity while living on this remote and desolate island. This is one of those films where I feel like I could praise almost every aspect of it. The big standout would probably be the performances. Robert Pattinson does a great job, and he's one of the actors I'm most excited to see their career continue to grow. But fucking Willem Dafoe is incredible in this movie. Not only is it my favorite performance of the year, it's probably one of my favorite performances of any year. His work in this is genius, and his commitment to it is honestly insane. And not that the Oscars matter very much, but it's a real travesty that he wasn't nominated because I think he deserved to win. The other big standout of the film would definitely be its cinematography, which actually was nominated for an Oscar, which is interesting, but definitely deserved. It's presented in a unique, almost square-like 1:19:1 aspect ratio, which perfectly enhances this feeling of claustrophobia and confinement and isolation, making you feel like you're trapped on the island with these characters. Really great, picturesque kind of shot composition. I was impressed that this film, though comprised of mostly simple lockdown shots, has this real energy to it, which is not only a real testament to the incredible performances in the film, but also the great editing. There's immaculate use of lighting and shadows in this film that make for really striking and almost transformative imagery. There are several shots in this film that are burned into my memory probably forever. The sound design in this film is also excellent and really adds so much to the atmosphere of dread. Similar to The Witch, Robert Eggers and his brother went out of their way to make sure they do as much research as possible, reading actual journal entries from actual lighthouse keepers from the 1800s to develop an era-accurate dialogue, which I think paid off immensely. And as for the actual writing of the story, I think it works both thematically and narratively. On the surface, it's kind of a simple story, a character study of these two guys as they lose their mind on this island. But beneath that, it captures a lot more, albeit ambiguously. So whether you think the film's about trauma or addiction, escaping the past, the story of Icarus, there's clearly a lot to dissect, which I think gives the film a lot of value and rewatchability. This is easily one of the most creative, visually striking, and well-acted films I've ever seen, so do yourself a favor and watch this as soon as you can. And at my number one film for 2019, you probably already guessed it, it's Parasite, directed by Bong Joon-ho. I first discovered Bong Joon-ho at a pretty formative age, like maybe 12 or 13, at a local comic shop. And in this shop, there was this little corner tucked away that was filled with just foreign films. It was here where I would discover tons of my favorites, whether it be Akira or Neon Genesis, but also directors I came to love like Park Chan-wook or Takashi Miike, and Bong Joon-ho. After renting and watching Memories of Murder, he made the list as one of my favorite directors, and he stayed there. There's so many aspects to his filmmaking that I just love, but two of the big ones are definitely his exploration of poverty and classism, and his melding of different genres and tones in a really effortless way. And as you would expect, Parasite has that in spades. This is definitely one of those films where the less you know going in, the better, so I won't really get into specifics, but it's an eclectic mix of different genres, as you would expect. In some ways, it's similar to a heist movie, and in others, a thriller, and in others, almost like a dark comedy, which gives this film such a unique personality and makes it unbelievably engaging. This is one of the most well-crafted films I've ever seen. You can't really point out a weak element throughout any of it. For one, there's the performances. Every performance feels so genuine and fully realized. And not just Song Kang-ho, who is literally always brilliant, but the entire ensemble really comes together to make something really special. I thought the cinematography was excellent, with really sharp and precise movement that almost resembled like a David Fincher film. I was surprised to see that it wasn't nominated for its cinematography. And yet Joker was. And to be honest, Joker getting 11 nominations is kind of a fucking meme. And even though the cinematography is maybe one of the better parts of that movie, I think Parasite is far more deserving. I've kind of already alluded to how great the writing is, but to gush about it some more, the writing is sharp and layered, and you can tell that it's made with attention and care. It has poignant symbolism and clever reincorporations that make the experience incredibly rewarding and rewatchable. And goddamn does this film still hold up after multiple rewatches. This film being able to capture so many tones and blend them so well gives credit to not only the great acting and great writing, but also the fantastic editing as well. The editing has a really fascinating rhythm to it with a lot of unconventional choices, like how they show the passage of time in certain scenes, or a purposeful lack of coverage in others. The pacing feels brisk, yet deliberate, and the editing really does a great job of enhancing the tension or hilarity in a way that never feels jarring, but won't be lost on the audience. All of these choices are made to enhance the storytelling, and it definitely worked. Also, this probably should have won for Best Editing. And the production design is insane. There's a flood scene in the movie where they flood a whole neighborhood, and they built this whole neighborhood inside of a water tank, and then flooded that on the last day of shooting to get the effect, which is absurd. I honestly think this is one of the most accessible foreign films ever made. Whether you or someone you know doesn't like reading subtitles, or think they're boring, or find foreign films pretentious, whatever it may be, watch this film. This movie made history, and it also gave me one of my favorite moments in recent memory.
Bong Joon-ho!
This is the second Oscar tonight and the third nomination for Bong Joon-ho.
너무 감사합니다. 그리고 어렸을 때 제가 항상 가슴에 새겼던 말이 있었는데 영화 공부할 때 가장 개인적인 것이 가장 창의적인 것이다. 그 말을 하셨던 분이 누구였냐면 제 책에서 읽은 거였지만.
Thank you so much. When I was young and studying cinema, there was a saying that I carved deep into my heart, which is the most personal is the most creative.
그 말은 that quote was from our great Martin Scorsese. So
Wow, this video ended up longer than expected, but hopefully I introduce you to some new movies you want to watch. Watching hundreds of movies to make this list, along with editing all this, took a lot of time and effort, so if you could leave a like or even subscribe, it would truly mean a lot. Also, if you have any movies you think may have not been on my radar, feel free to comment about them down below. Or you can yell at me for not including this, or this, or that one, or this one, or that one, or that one, or this, that one, this one, or that one, or that one, or this one, or that one, or that one, or that one, or this one, that one, this one.